On the road, in the gym, at a coffee house. No matter where you listen, this is Prevention Perk. I'm Steve Miller with Mid-America PTTC. It's time to perk up our prevention efforts. My guest today is Dr. Emily Kline, a clinical psychologist and assistant professor of psychiatry at Boston University School of Medicine. She serves as the Director of Psychological Services for the Wellness and Recovery After Psychosis team and leads the Motivational Interviewing for Loved Ones Lab at Boston Medical Center. Dr. Kline is the author of The School of Hard Talks, How to Have Real Conversations with Your Almost Grown Kids, and the creator of the School of Hard Talks Online. Hello, Emily, and welcome to Prevention Perk.
Hi, thanks for having me on.
Glad to have you here. I'm glad that we got connected. This is a really cool subject, and I'm glad that we're going to get a chance to unpack it. But before we get into talking about your work, how did you get interested in prevention? Actually, what was your path to prevention?
I would say that my path to prevention really started with working with adults who had pretty serious mental illnesses and addiction histories. And it was, I was fascinated that I was so young, but I could connect with them in this first job that I had working in the community. And it was amazing to be able to connect across all those life experience differences and to really get a sense of where they had come from, like what was the path that led them to the difficulties that they were experiencing. And it leads to the imaginative possibility of, could there have been some diversion? Could there have been another way? And for a lot of people, no, not really. Their life is what it is, and it's not so bad. They're making the best of it. But for other people, they did imply that there could have been some other path. And so when I started doing therapy, I'm a psychologist. So I started doing therapy. I started working a lot with families. And that was one of the questions that the parents always had for me, is sort of, what can I be doing differently at home in between the meetings that we have with you? And so I started working on a program for parents, and it just kind of took off. People were really interested in it, and not just for people. I originally intended it for, again, was working with people who had pretty serious mental illnesses, but people whose kids didn't, really were curious, like, what can we learn from these families and these experts who work with people who are kind of in the deep end of the pool, and apply what they know about, what could have gone differently to our kids, to prevention.
You're listening to Prevention Perk. The funder of this project, along with all the other products of the Mid-America PTTC, is the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. Although funded by SAMHSA, the content of this recording does not necessarily reflect the views of SAMHSA. Talk, They Hear You is a national youth substance use prevention campaign that helps parents and caregivers, educators, and community members get informed, be prepared, and take action to prevent underage drinking and other substance use. To learn more, visit samhsa.gov/Talk, They Hear You. I want to remind everybody your book that you have is The School of Hard Talks, How to Have Real Conversations with Your, I like that, almost grown kids. You start having that conversation younger and younger, but I get where you're coming from. So let's talk a little bit about this work that you've published, and just kind of walk us through the School of Hard Talks.
Sure. So, like I said, I've worked doing family therapy with individuals who have pretty serious mental illness or addiction problems for a while. And the approach that I use most often is called motivational interviewing. And that's an evidence-based therapeutic communication style that you can pretty much use to talk about any kind of behavior change that somebody might be wrestling with. So it came out of the field of addiction, to talk to people who were struggling with active addictions and with behavior change in terms of reducing their alcohol or drug consumption. But I found that it was also really, really useful for talking with people about, maybe thinking about going back to school or to work, talking about whether they want to try taking a medication for the problem that they're having, talking about basic stuff like getting better quality sleep or, getting a schedule going in their life. And the parents, like I said, would call me in between the sessions and say, okay, but how do I get my relative or my child to, come to the family holiday party? How do I get them to clean their room? All these urgent concerns that we have when our family member is not doing well. And I would try coaching the parents in this technique. And eventually just kind of developed a program specifically to train family caregivers of people struggling with mental illness and addiction to use motivational interviewing. And that's what the book is really about. It's about taking those concepts of motivational interviewing and giving this incredibly useful set of conversational tools to families, both families whose family member is really struggling, but also families who just want to know, like, how do I talk to my basically typically developing 14, 15-year-old about, cannabis or studying for tests or, staying safe in the car.
So I'm curious, and I get, having these conversations. You say how to have real conversations with your kids. What do you mean? How can I benchmark that? How do I compare that to the not real conversation?
Well, I think a really good benchmark, what a great question. A good benchmark is how much does the kid talk, right? Are they doing at least 50% of the speaking? Because if they're not, then the likelihood is that you're really talking at them, not with them.
Right. So with the parents, they're calling you or they're asking in between these sessions, is it, are they receptive to this?
Oh,
Once you
yeah.
start telling them, here's what I think you need to do. You need to have this kind of a conversation, and here's how you set up this equity in the conversation.
The parents I work with tend to be people who are really looking to try something new. I don't really like going out there and waving my book around people who are, totally feeling good about their relationships with their kids and saying, oh, you really ought to be doing something different.
Right.
I don't
So there's
believe
some
that.
motivation already in
Exactly.
for them
Exactly.
and or their child to get better. Yeah.
Right. And the parents who I talk to are the ones who are looking for something new. Or if they might not realize they're looking for something new, but they say, well, here's how we deal with this problem of, for instance, marijuana in our family. If I smell it or if I know that he's using it, then, here's the consequence. And that works for some families, but usually if they're coming to see me, it's because it's not working that well,
Right.
And so I just say, how's that working? And they say, not great, And I say, do you want to learn something? You want to try something new? And they say, yeah. So that's the gist of the technique in and of itself, is that you're always trying to elicit motivation to try something new and to change behavior rather than kind of, bashing people over the head with it. Like, you should be doing this, not that.
Well, I'm curious. So you talk about most of your clients coming in. So I can imagine in my mind their child is struggling and they want the best for their child. So there is some motivation in that. But how is this maybe applicable in that scenario where they just can't seem to get to that conversation? Like, that they just won't bring it up, or that that maybe they're afraid of it, so to speak. Is this applicable in that venue as well? Like you're motivating one to motivate the other.
Right. Yeah. So I think parents have this idea that they ought to, talk to their kids about drugs and sex and fast driving and rock and roll, whatever, and but we don't always know what to say, so you have this idea that I ought to talk to my kid, but what would I say? And then you wind up giving some kind of awkward lecture, or, as you're suggesting, avoiding the conversation altogether. So yeah, the book kind of gives a roadmap for how to navigate these conversations, either because you are having them and they're going terribly, or because you're not having them and you don't know where to start.
Right. So like practical hints, I guess, like follow this. Once you say this, then do that kind of a thing.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. So what I've created is sort of a 5-step cheat sheet to a hard talk. So do you want me to walk you through it?
Sure. I mean, and so can the hard talk be? It can be any risky behavior as having that hard talk. It could be first dates, or it could be substance use, or it could be their mental illness that maybe they're struggling with. That kind of a hard talk. It could be any of those. Okay.
Sure. And I like to deal in concrete. So do you want to, pick a scenario? Because I think that makes it come to life much better.
Well, I think that, primarily our audience would be in the substance use prevention. So we're probably talking about, in today's world, if we want real concrete, marijuana is medicine, and it's really good for me. That's
Great.
coming from the
Okay.
voice of a teenager that maybe they're having consequences because of their marijuana use.
Okay. Great. So perfect example. And yeah, again, one that in 2023 has just taken off like wildfire. In the US, and where I live in Massachusetts, it's legal. It's not, you need to be 21 to buy it, but plenty of people are getting their hands on it well before the age of 21. So the first step in the hard talk method is to start with a really neutral observation. So I might say something like, a lot of kids at your school are using marijuana, or even the car smells like marijuana, right? And I'm going to keep it short and simple to see how you react, because I'll learn a lot depending on sort of what you say. So, I'm picking my moment. I'm choosing a time when we have time to talk, maybe in the car or taking a walk together. And I just make an observation like, hey, I noticed that seems like a lot of kids are using marijuana. And I see what you say, right? And I might ask some good questions about it. Like, what do your friends think about marijuana? What do you think about it? What do you see as the pros and cons of using it? So that's step 2, is to really be curious and try and learn more by asking good questions and not jumping to the place where I need to deliver a lecture, because I want to learn first what you think. The whole method is based on the idea that people are most receptive to advice and to healthy behavior change when they're feeling understood, confident, and in control. So I'm going to state my observation, and then number 2, ask some questions to get a sense of how you're feeling and to make sure that I understand you. The third step is that once you start telling me about your attitudes or your plans, I resist that urge to like give advice or set the record straight. I just do some reflections. So, you want to role play a little bit?
Sure.
Okay. So I've heard that a lot of kids at your school, or, the principal sent out a message that said no marijuana allowed on campus. And so it seems like a lot of kids are using it.
Yeah. I mean, I've heard of some kids that are, but I don't know any of them.
Mm-hmm. So what do your friends think about that?
Some of them think that it's okay because it's medicine, and it seems like if the doctors say it's okay, then it's okay. And our parents are, they're older and they just don't understand that things have changed.
So from you and your friend's perspective, it seems like marijuana is pretty harmless and a lot of adults are kind of overreacting.
Yeah. Yeah. That's exactly what most of my friends think. It's like, mom and dad just don't understand. And it is, I mean, I drive by it on the way to school. They sell it. So there's obviously, it can't be that bad.
Sure. So you're feeling like because it's now legally available, that means that it's not that harmful. Am I getting that right?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And if it's medicine, I mean, if I have a headache and I take aspirin, it makes it better. So if marijuana is medicine, then I don't know if I would say it's good for me, but it's okay.
Yeah. So interesting. Okay, so those are the first couple steps of the method, right? So I
Right.
did some reflections. Did you catch that?
Yes. Yes.
And that doesn't mean I was in my head, I was like, "Ooh, everything you're saying is wrong. I want to set you straight," right? But I resisted that urge because I wanted to make sure that you felt like I was listening
Right.
and that I was really making a good faith effort to understand where you were coming from.
And I'm assuming kind of in that scenario, if it were a real life, parent child relationship and you suspect like I've smelled it in the car, instead of being accusational, what you're leading towards is, well, some of my friends have talked about it or used it. It's like, keep that conversation going. Well, I've tried it a couple of times. You're trying to get to the truth without being accusatory or closing the door. I've heard like open the door, like opening the door is making a two-way dialogue without I'm the parent and things are going to be my way, because
Yeah, right.
I care about you. There's an authoritarian something here, but I care about you and I want the truth, but being more measured about having that conversation.
It's strategic,
And it's
you
hard to keep
know?
as any adult, whether it's your child or in any situation, it's hard to kind of keep your opinion out of this. It's like, but I know better. So listen to me. Right.
Yeah, and I do think that we need to share our opinions and to correct this rampant misinformation that's out there. I mean, I
Right.
actually think that's really important, but I think we need to be really strategic about how we do that because I want young people to actually listen to us.
Right.
And so that's why we kind of set the stage and we lay the groundwork by asking these questions and doing reflections and having this kind of light touch when we approach the conversation so that they don't tune us out.
Well, I've experienced this kind of in real time, and you're a professional, so you may have this experience as well. But I've done this for several years, and I've noticed in the I'm going to say the last 5 to 7 years, and it could have been longer, but there's more of this, not just the conversation about including teens in the prevention work that we do, but the teens actually they're very sophisticated today. They're very well informed compared to when I was a teen because they have this thing at their fingertips. And I've seen teens do presentations where they're kind of wanting to say, I want to be a part of the conversation. And it's almost like to be told, compare and contrast, to be told, well, because I told you so, would be an old school kind of parenting. And now it's kind of like, just tell me the truth. I want to tell you the truth, but I want you to tell me the truth. And it's kind of an equalizer. And I remember watching this young girl who she was like 13 years old, and they had a sophomore, a seventh grader, and a fifth grader. I can't remember exactly what it was. And this seventh grader asked the audience, how many of you actually have someone my age on your coalition doing drug prevention work? And there were 70 people in the room and 4 people raised their hands. She's just a kid. Very innocently, she said, what's wrong with the rest of you? We want to sit at the table because we really want to try to help our friends.
Wow,
And I
that's
thought
really
that would
impressive.
have never been said when I was a teen in middle school. I don't know that we would have thought that, let alone been that self-empowered to speak up in a room full of professionals. But she
Yeah,
was just, why don't you invite other people to the table? And I think that's where teens are today. They don't resonate with the scare tactic. They
right,
they want to
right.
be educated. They want to know the truth, and they want you, the parent, to walk us through that, to help us understand why you're telling us to say no.
Yeah. So let's jump back into the
Sure.
role play because I don't want to leave parents hanging. So so do you just leave that out there, so I might say something, everything you said is so true. And I might comment on that by saying like, wow, you are really observing what's going on around you. And it sounds like you and your friends are having some conversations about this. You're staying up to date. You're doing your own research. But I want to tell you some of the things that I think are important for you to know. Is that okay for me to share that?
Yes.
Okay. So, you're right that marijuana got approval for use as medicine for some conditions, but the research on whether it really helps people or not is pretty like, there's not much there. Not much research has really been done to show whether it can really help people. And the really important thing is that it's never been studied in young people. And so there's really no indication that it would be safe for teenagers to use. And there's a lot of concerns that doctors have that it could like affect the way that your brain develops. And more than that, it could also get you in trouble with your friends at school. And I don't want to see that happen to you.
So, Mom, you've always told me that I should try new things, and I'm not saying anything, but just suppose that maybe I was curious and I wanted to try something like marijuana. What would you think about that?
I don't want you to use marijuana until you're at least 21, but tell me more about what you're thinking.
Well, it's just like I said. I mean, some of my friends have talked about it, and I don't want you to get mad, but some of them have tried it, and I just don't know what your reaction would be if I, for some reason was curious about it and tried it. Like I don't know what it would be like.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, I'm trying to think how I would legitimately react as a parent in this situation, Steve. This is so rich,
Well,
and I
the reason
think,
I went down that path, and we didn't rehearse this in any way, shape, or form, is
no.
because you said like, well, what if the parent smelled it in the car or something like that?
Mhm.
Obviously, you kind of know something that I don't know that you know. And so, in my mind, I'm thinking, I want to know what you're really going to say if I say, well, I have tried marijuana. Like, am I going to get in
Yeah, right,
trouble? Am I
exactly.
going to be told I can't hang out with my friends? Am I going to be scolded in some way that I'm going to regret being honest with my parent? Because I
Yeah,
think that that's a reality for all of us. Like we want to have this dialogue, but we don't want to be held accountable in some way that like that's not what I expected was going to happen. Like you don't really aren't interested in what I have to say. You're just interested in punishing.
right. I mean,
That kind of scenario.
and you also have to think about exactly what behavior you are applying that consequence to as a parent. So are you really punishing your child for trying marijuana, or are you punishing them for telling you?
Right.
Right. And so you want to, I think it's valid to do the former, but it's hard to do that without also just, it's one thing if you bust them, right? But
Right.
then if they come to you and they want to come clean and they have questions, I would be really cautious about, I would take a deep breath, and try and stay really level and sort of, relatively cool about that. If my kid after the fact was like, well, actually, I have tried it. Because, in that case, you don't want to punish them for talking to you.
Right.
But I think, we do want to discourage them from doing it. I read this study that was a big study out of Denmark that followed, thousands of families. And it's the kind of thing you can never do in the US because people just aren't that open with like the government. We don't answer questions about our private lives about this
Right.
stuff. But, in Scandinavia, they have these big population research studies. So they looked at thousands of families, and they looked at whether adolescents were using tobacco, alcohol, cannabis, and also having sex, and specifically around the drugs. They looked at the predictors of which kids were using the most tobacco, alcohol, marijuana. And here were the two relevant predictors in terms of things that parents can actually do something about. Number one is, did they feel like they had a warm relationship with their parents? And I think that when you use this approach, when you act curious, when you offer reflections, when you show that you're listening, you can build up that warmth. And there's other ways to build up warmth too, just doing things together, hanging out, having fun, having traditions, having rituals, all that's important. The other predictor in the study was this is so straightforward, it's almost like stupid, but it was whether kids said that their parents had said they're allowed to. Right? The question was phrased something like, Does your parent approve of you using marijuana? And it was like agree, neutral, disagree. And if you said, no, my parent has made it clear they do not want me doing it, they were less likely to do it.
Yeah. And I'm when you said that, I thought, in a teen's mind, I'm just thinking it could be implied one way or the other if it's not talked about, like not saying anything about it. It's almost like saying, well, they don't really care, which means it's okay because they didn't tell me no. So it's like like reading into it in your own way. It's like, well, if it hasn't been talked about it, it's okay.
Right. And you have to be real about your setting, right? So if you live in a town where, thinking about alcohol and social norms and, a lot of kids go to college, and at college, everybody drinks, and that's a norm. And so you can't stick your head in the sand about that, but you can still say what you do and don't expect.
My expectation is this. Yeah.
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 Yeah. So
and
you
it's
can say,
harder
well, I know
for
you're
them
going
to
to
break
drink.
that. Yeah.
I don't want you to binge drink. I don't want you to, have 8 cups of jungle juice before a party.
Right.
Or, some parents feel like, oh, well, I smoke, I use edibles, I drink alcohol, so I can't tell my kid what to do.
Right.
Well, that's kind of silly. Like, yes, you can. You can say, I want you to wait until you're 18, 20, whatever it is.
And as part of that, and as a psychologist, is that it's that bond between the parent and the child. It's like, I've heard this before in some way, like the child doesn't want to let their parent down. It's like that becomes it's a reality. My mom and dad said, don't do this. And I don't want to be the one that lied to them. Like, so I will honor that to the best of my ability. Peers and all that, can be very pressure oriented, but it's that bond, or it's that connection, maybe tied to that warm handoff or that warm connection that you said.
Yeah, I think parents underestimate the power of that, and we feel like we have to give some kind of deterrent, like, oh, if you do this, I'm taking away the car keys, or you're going to be grounded, or I'm taking your phone. But, in those strategies, again, if that works for you, do it.
Right.
Good. But I also think don't underestimate what you're saying, just the power of the relationship. That, if your child actually cares what you think and doesn't want to have conflict, doesn't want to have disapproval in that relationship.
Yeah. So you and I've had the conversation up to you're doing some investigation. How do we move this conversation further along?
Yeah. So what did I do? I made an observation about, the principal sent this email. What's going on? I did that investigation. I offered some reflections. I didn't get into an argument. And then I asked permission to share my own perspective. And of course, I don't need permission to share my own opinions with my own kids, right? That's silly. But if you seek it, they're more likely to be listening, right? Because they're like, what is she about to say?
Right.
So you said yes. And I did share my own perspective, which is that this, of course, it is legal. I get that you're noticing this. I appreciate that you're an observant, smart person in this world, but we're not really sure what it helps people with. And we don't think that it helps kids with anything. And so I want you to wait to try it, even if you are curious. And then I might see how that landed. So I don't know. What do you think of that?
Well, I don't know if I can make a promise till I'm 21. I mean, I don't want to be the only one of my friends that doesn't try it.
Yeah, like it's important to you to not kind of be the only person. I hear that.
And I mean, I still want to hang out with those friends, even if they are trying it. It's hard to say 21. That's a long time from now. I'm 17.
So the friendships are really important to you, and you don't want to miss out.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, 21 is a long time. And of course I can't follow you around all the time. And I know that some of your friends are going to use this. I'm not stupid. I mean, when I was your age, it was the same. It was similar, though what we were using was a lot less strong than probably what your friends are getting their hands on. And I just hope that you'll use good judgment about like, I hope you'll wait. I hope that you'll come to me with questions. And, you know, and then this is where kind of, I'm going to break the role play right now. This is where your own values as a parent and your own expectations might come into play. So some parents might just come down on like, I want you to wait, or I don't ever want you to do it. Other parents might be like, well, I hope you will, they might have other lines in the sand. It's like, well, I hope you'll never use anything that you don't know exactly where it came from, or, never ever use in a situation where you need all your faculties, like in school or while you're driving. I don't know, but I think parents should, give it a think. Like, what are you most worried about, and communicate that. Like, this is what I really don't want.
So I'm curious, I don't know if negotiation comes to mind. Is that a strategy? Like I want you to, I don't know if promise is the right word, but you said, put this off until you're 21. Is there a, I don't know if negotiation is the right word, but like, if you don't do this, there's some kind of a reward for following that expectation. Is that it? Or is that kind of, is that now you're starting to gamble?
Yeah, right. So, in the situation that you offered up, we're talking about a 17-year-old. And I think that for a 17-year-old, the best reward is their parents' good graces. And that feeling of freedom that I'm not keeping secrets.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, and the other thing is that I was transparent in this conversation, which is also part of it. This technique is in the book. I call it a control handover. The acknowledgement that I'm not going to follow you around. I might not know, right? With a 17-year-old, I really might not know. Yeah. I moved out of my parents' house when I was 17, right? I went off to college. They didn't know what I was doing. 17-year-olds can be pretty autonomous. And so I think acknowledging that they're going to have to use their judgment, and that you're there to talk and to help them think things through. And then the other piece you mentioned was like sort of a negotiation. So what I was doing there was a strategy that is called harm reduction. And sometimes harm reduction gets a bad rap. But what harm reduction really means is thinking less in absolute terms about whether I think using this substance is like acceptable. But if I don't have control over the other person, which is maybe true of a 17-year-old who's like moving out, or who I don't have the bandwidth to follow around all the time, thinking about what harms am I most concerned about. I might be, if I'm a parent of a 17-year-old, I'm probably most concerned about the potential for addiction. And also about like heavy use, like using every day, which is kind of the same thing.
And every situation is different. I mean, if this is the scenario and that I want to be a doctor or something, the higher likelihood of success for that, there's a correlation about what substances I'm using, the amount of the substance I'm using. So that kind of a conversation I would think is really valuable. I know what your aspirations are in life, and it's going to be harder to get there if you're doing these kinds of things.
Right. Or even asking it as a question, like, do you think that, there might be, what do you see as the pros and cons, essentially? Like, pros, you've articulated, and it's that you're kind of curious and your friends are using it and it seems harmless. And maybe secretly you tried it a couple times and liked it. Which isn't a pro that you've stated in the conversation, but I'm taking that for granted.
Right.
But if I've listened to those pros and I've validated them rather than just freaking out, I might also be able to ask you about cons and ask you to describe those, because now you're thinking, and I don't have to do all the thinking here. You're a smart kid. So is there any downside of trying marijuana other than my disapproval?
Yeah, there's a lot to say for that. It's kind of empowering them to make their own choices, but at the same time, wanting to make sure that they're safe and making healthy choices. But a parent can't make that choice for them. Somehow or another, we're trying to lead them towards making the right decision for themselves and being honest about it as time goes on, because 17 turns into 18. And then, like you said, they may disappear from home, but that doesn't mean that as a parent, we've stopped worrying or being concerned about them. Keep that door open so that they'll say, yeah, this is what's going on now that I'm cool and hanging out at the college campus.
Right. And that's why I called the book, How to Have Real Conversations with Your Almost Grown Kids, because that's a wide category, right? Like in some ways, 12-year-olds can be almost grown, but in a lot of ways, 32-year-olds are almost grown, because we all still need our parents sometimes and would benefit from their wisdom and their guidance.
I'm curious, and I'm sure the audience, if they haven't already started to use the Google machine, how do they connect more with your work?
So I have a couple of resources I want to offer. You can find my website. It's Dr. Emily Kline, DrEmilykline.com. The book is called The School of Hard Talks, How to Have Conversations with Your Almost Grown Kids. You can get it on Amazon or, any bookstore. It came out in April. And I also have a free e-course that parents can check out. You don't have to be a parent, by the way. Anybody can benefit if you want to learn more about motivational interviewing and how to use it with young people. You can find it most easily probably by just Googling School of Hard Talks online, and that is free. So you can check that out. And it's about an hour and a half, depending on sort of how much you sit with the ideas. But it's a fun little course, and it's interactive, and it's broken up into little bite-sized pieces.
When I started to prepare for talking with you, there's also, when you talked about the motivational interviewing, is it Milo?
Yeah, Milo. So I call the approach motivational interviewing for loved ones. And actually, if you're in Missouri, you can also connect with Heather Harlan, actually, who's offering courses on this out of the Columbia Boone County Public Health Department. And if you're in Massachusetts, you can come and find me at Boston Medical Center if you want to get more sort of one-on-one coaching on the approach.
You're listening to Prevention Perk. Dr. Emily Kline created Motivational Interviewing for Loved Ones, a simplified motivational interviewing curriculum for family caregivers, and the School of Hard Talks online, a free e-course for parents of teens and young adults interested in learning how they can use motivational interviewing with their kids. Her book, The School of Hard Talks, How to Have Real Conversations with Your Almost Grown Kids, is available wherever you buy books. There are links to these resources in our show notes. So this is your opportunity, Emily, to be the sage on the stage. Is there something we haven't talked about, or maybe that certain something that you want the audience to think, say, or do now that we've had this conversation?
I would say that, I would encourage listeners who want to try the approach to start by, first of all, not worrying about what they did before. We all have long lives, and we can say and do many things and always try something different today or tomorrow than we did yesterday if we want to. And if you want to try it, the next time that you're talking with somebody and they say something where you feel that desire to correct the record or argue with them, try doing a reflection instead. Just try and summarize what they said. Something like, well, it sounds like your friends really feel this is harmless, and just see what happens. It's kind of a fun experiment to try on your friends or your kids or your spouse.
That's fantastic. My guest on this episode has been Dr. Emily Kline. I appreciate you taking time out and having a conversation with us on the Prevention Perk.
You are so welcome. Thank you for helping me get this information out there.
And thank you for listening to Prevention Perk, a podcast from Mid-America PTTC. To learn more about our innovations, visit pttcnetwork.org and look under Your PTTC for the Mid-America link. Remember, prevention is better together. Together, we are stronger.